Going live now. Okay, should be good.
I will call to order the January 19th regular board meeting of the Woodford County Board of Education. It is via video teleconference. Before we get into the agenda this evening, I would like to read a statement. When I was hired as superintendent in 2008, I quickly discovered Woodford County was a special place, a place where I could finish my career. That time has come. I will be retiring as of June 30th. I am grateful that the Board of Education was willing to step out and hire someone who did not have superintendent experience for such a sought-after position. I come from a family of educators, and they have been extremely supportive of me throughout my career. I'm sure my mom is watching this evening, so thank you, Mom, for always being my biggest cheerleader. To our students, you have been my motivation for everything we have done during my tenure. Our kids never cease to amaze me, and my greatest sense of pride has come from your accomplishments. Whether that's been in the classroom, in the performing arts, or in athletics, I have thoroughly enjoyed seeing your successes. To every member of Team Woodford, I am thankful for your heart and for everything you have done to create outstanding opportunities and experiences for our students. Regardless of the position you hold in the district, each person is valuable and important to achieving our mission. Thank you for loving our kids and making a difference in their lives. To the Woodford County community, your support for our schools is unwavering. You freely give of your time, your talents, and your resources to assist in meeting the diverse needs of our students. To my district staff, simply, you are the best. You have a whatever it takes mentality, and we are continually looking for ways to better serve our schools. We spend a lot of time together, and each of you is more than a colleague. You are part of my extended family. Finally, to my wife, Julie, and daughter, Annabeth, words can't adequately express my gratitude to you. You both have sacrificed much over the past 13 years. Whether that has meant nights home without me due to school events or meetings, having to hear public criticism over decisions I've made, or helping me carry the burdens that come along with this position. You have stood beside me every step of the way and demonstrated true unconditional love. I love you both. Since my tenure began, I have concluded my remarks at each board meeting with, "It is an honor to serve as your superintendent." I will end once again by saying, it truly has been my honor to serve as your superintendent over these past 13 years. So, the first order of business at tonight's meeting is to elect the chair. So I will open the floor for nominations.
Mr. Hawkins, this is Allison.
Yes.
I'd like to elect Danny Bradley as chair of the board.
Okay. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, I would entertain, we have a motion from Ms. Richardson then for Ms. Bradley to serve as the chair. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, like sign. It is unanimous. So I will turn the gavel over to Ms. Bradley and let you move forward with the remainder of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. And I think that I speak for all of us in extending our thanks to you and to your family for your service to the students of Woodford County. The district growth under your tenure has been exceptional, and we are all truly grateful for your leadership and dedication to our students.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda, is there a motion for a vice chair? I would move for Chair. Ms. Springate is nominated as vice chair. Are there any other nominations?
I would like to make a nomination. I think that it would be a great idea. This is the only reason I'm doing this, but I think that it would be wonderful to have a new board member as the vice chair. So therefore, I make a motion to nominate Amanda Glass for vice chair.
Okay, so there are two nominees on the floor for the office of vice chair. Are there any others? Hearing none, we will vote. Mr. Hawkins, who would typically call roll on this?
Yes, I think you would vote. Mr. Chenoweth may want to jump in, but you would vote on the first nominee. Is that right, Grant?
Yes.
Okay, so we will call the roll on Ms. Springate as a nominee for vice chair. And begin with Ms. Richardson.
Nay.
Ms. Springate?
Yes.
Ms. Glass? Nay. Ms. McHale?
Yes.
And the chair votes nay. Moving on to the nomination of Ms. Glass. Ms. Richardson?
Yes.
Ms. Springate?
Nay.
Ms. Glass? Yes. Ms. McHale?
No.
And the chair votes yes. So Mrs. Glass is elected as the vice chair. The next agenda item is designate school board secretary. And I believe that traditionally Mr. Hawkins holds this position. Is a nomination required? Or just the...
I don't believe so. It's typically been designated as whoever the superintendent is.
Okay. And so I move that Mr. Hawkins be the designated school board secretary. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Richardson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. The motion carries 5-0. And the next item is designate school board treasurer. And typically, I believe that's the chief financial officer.
That is correct.
Okay, so I will nominate Mr. Martello to the office of school board treasurer. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Richardson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, the motion carries 5-0. The next item is the roll call, and all members are present, 4 in person and 1 virtual. And next we come to public comment, and there are none. So we will move on to our instructional update from Mr. Asher.
Thank you. Good evening once again, and Happy New Year. All right.
Happy New Year.
It's been a little while since we've seen each other. Welcome. So what I want to start with today, instructional update, is yet another transition in our business of teaching and learning that we just embarked on today. But before we get into that, I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the outstanding efforts of our teachers, administrators, and support staff. They faced countless challenges under these circumstances over the past nearly almost a year now, but have remained resilient through everything and dedicated to supporting students. And for that, they are to be commended. So I wanted to make sure, again, yet another transition, that they've navigated those waters and had a great start to that today. So our return to in-person today, elementary started back under our dual system, much like we had in the fall, to where we have our 5-day in-person format for those that chose, or the virtual academy. And while this was similar to what we did in the fall, it's been a while. And so it was yet another first day of school for our elementaries in terms of going over all those logistics, all those protocols in regard to safety and healthy at school. And you also have to consider that for the first time, students who have not been in all year, who made that choice to then come back in person for the first time this year, and this would be the first time that they stepped foot in the school building. So it truly was yet another first day of school. As for our elementary virtual academy, there did have to be some restructuring, and I believe I talked some about this in December, just in the classes and the teachers due to a number of students coming back in person, and therefore the elementary virtual academy shrinking in size by students. But those changes have been in place since January 4th. So a lot of those kinks, so to speak, have been worked out over these past couple of weeks. So that's the elementary transition. As far as middle and high, of course, starting something completely new when we consider the hybrid that they started today. So if you're not aware, the way that is working is Monday will be an all virtual day for all students. Of course, being out yesterday, we didn't have that opportunity. So in many cases, they covered the logistics, the content back on Friday. But moving forward, Monday would be an all virtual day. And the main purpose of that is just to have a whole group lesson, deliver the instruction, as well as set up for the remainder of the week what students are to expect. A group, which started today, they'll be in person on Tuesdays and Thursdays, B groups on Wednesdays and Fridays. And just want to clarify, because I know there were some questions through our social media posts and things like that. The days that are not in person, that's what's considered asynchronous, meaning that they will have assignments to complete, although they'll be much more independent. But both of our schools have set up communication protocols with those teachers who are in the building teaching via email, messaging systems, as well as other means of support for students to hop on for help, is a term that the high school originated, and I think the middle school is trying to duplicate that format. In regard to the virtual academy for middle and high school, very similar to elementary, we had to do some restructuring with the teaching staff and with the students. But again, those changes went into place on January 4th, so those have been going a couple of weeks now in order to get those plans in place. So I feel like month after month, I go over different diagrams and things that we've done to transition. So here we are now with yet something new. But again, kudos to our teachers, to our administrators, and our support staff for working their way through all of this. I'll stop there, and any questions about that reentry at this point?
On the asynchronous assignments, are those all given on their in-person day, and then they just work through them at their own pace on their asynchronous day?
Not necessarily. That's going to vary by class and by teacher. They may cover some of that content. In many cases, I have 8th graders, and I've looked at their week at a glance. Those are already spelled out for the week of what they're going to do. So it's just really going to vary depending on the content, depending on the teacher, depending on where they're at. And I will also say, again, this is brand new. So there's going to be some balancing and figuring out how this is going to work if I see a kid one day but not the next, and how to make sure that the learning is continuous over time. So still some need to put that in place to figure that out.
Sure, and obviously we are all appreciative of yet another pivot for all of our teachers and their success in doing that. Yes. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Asher, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that you guys are working nonstop on this, and I appreciate it. The only question that I've had from parents today, with it being back on this, with us starting the A group, B group situation, I've had several phone calls today from parents who have just concerned that, or have expressed concern that their kids have today, they only had like maybe a paragraph to read and a couple of questions to answer. That was it that they had for the day. Is this something that's going to be ongoing, or are they just trying to transition into this where they can have the days that they're off, have a little more work that they have to do? How are you guys kind of watching over that? Because I know for a few students, they spent like maybe 30 minutes, doing their work this morning, then the rest of the day they had free. So I think the parents' concern was that on their days off, they're just basically going to be, 30 minutes doing classwork, and then the rest of the day be done.
Right. Both schools, both middle and high school, had spelled out plans for their teachers, for their staff, to outline that. For example, at the high school, I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but what they're aiming for is 40 minutes of classwork per class for students. Now, I will say, similar to what I said to Ms. Bradley, this is going to take a little bit of time, to gauge how much to give, how long that's going to take. So that will be something that's monitored throughout. I will certainly cut a little bit of slack on the first day here. But again, they've outlined expectations to try to make sure that it's not too much, but it is enough to ensure that they're engaged and learning on that asynchronous day. So we'll continue to monitor that is the best answer I can give you, okay?
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, I understand. I know that it's difficult for you guys to come up with this and try to get it, going right off the bat. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. If no other questions on that topic, I'm moving forward with our learning recovery planning process. And this is just beginning. And what we mean by that is we did a number of assessments back in the fall and into the winter, and some of those continue even for kids that are virtual and returning to in person. But ultimately, what schools are developing plans based on that fall and winter data to provide supports and interventions specifically to the students most at risk who did fall behind, who are in need of recovery, and looking at multiple strategies to do that. Some of the examples would be win time, and I think I've described that before, what I need, and putting in different structures for that, especially now that we're in person. There are complications with that, however, still, when you consider you can't shuffle kids around, you can't move them room to room as easily, so they're trying to work through that. Also ESS, meaning extended school services, of using that as a support. And then ultimately what we're looking out ahead to is a very extensive summer school program. We're still a ways out, obviously, on that, but we want to get that on the radar and start making some tentative plans. Dr. Jones, that falls under her responsibility. She's outlined a budget and drafted an overall plan that we will be sharing with our schools very soon. But I just want to put that in your ear when we talk about learning recovery planning. Can't put everything into place now, but we know it's going to be needed on down the road. Some short-term things and some more long-term. So I'll continue to update on the progress of that. Any questions about that process? And then finally, as far as instructional, the CSIPs, the Comprehensive School Improvement Plans, are on the agenda for this month. Each of you received a copy of each school's. I do want to preface and just maybe answer some questions ahead of time, perhaps. Similar to the CDIP, the District Improvement Plan, a lot of these items are going to be carried over due to circumstances, right? They were not able to accomplish some of those goals or strategies that were on last year's plan. So many of those things will be carried over. Some of the more short-term or reactive, I guess, type of strategies, those are going to go into place with that learning recovery plan that I described. Whereas the CSIP is more long-term, bigger picture type things. Now, I would expect adjustments on next year's plan, but at this point, a lot of things just being carried over. You will see a couple different formats on the attachments that you have of the school plans, and that's why. Some simply carried over the format from last year. The format that we were given from the state this year is a little bit different. You can almost opt to do either. So some schools went ahead with the new format, whereas others used one very similar to the district plan that I reviewed, just the outline and the way it looks. Some of the schools will look like that. So that was the last time on their instructional. Any questions about their CSIPs at this point?
Were there any items on there that were a big departure that you wanted to point out, or?
Not necessarily anything that come to mind. As far as departure, what do you mean by that?
Just a big change. I didn't see anything in looking through them, but it's a lot to look at, and I didn't know if there's anything you wanted.
No major changes. Almost play it safe on a long range plan like that. It's almost too soon to make major changes. Whereas I described the recovery plan as that's more reactive, and that we're going to use that format before adjusting an overall CSIP.
And that might be something, I know we had discussed as a board, inviting the individual school principals to the meetings at some point, since we're not able to go into the schools and have our meetings there and get the updates. Maybe this would be a good time to start with a new board and let them get familiarized with the different principals and with their building.
We're planning on inviting them starting in February, probably 2 per meeting.
Perfect, thank you. I think that'll be great. There's different things about each of our schools that make them unique and wonderful. And
Right.
it's a great time for the board to learn those.
Right. Anything else under the area of instruction? I also wanted, as I typically do each month, update you on equity, our equity work. So obviously, as we flip the calendar to 21, our work continues. We do have new membership, as we discussed back in December. We have, over the past several months, we've added our student representatives. We have now Ms. Springate, Ms. Bradley have joined as our board representatives. So we have 2 sitting in with our team. We met just last week, and one of the major topics and agenda items we talked about, and this is very early in the planning stages, was just a collaboration project with WEEP, Woodford Educational Endowment Foundation, who approached us, me, about a collaboration project that they want to do. Basically, again, these are early stages, but to provide funds for projects that are geared towards diversity and understanding equity and anti-racism. We spent a lot of time talking through, because you want to spell that out specifically, you want to make sure that it has the right target and the right purpose and ultimately the correct outcome. So we spent a lot of time talking about that as a team, continue with edits to that plan, and we'll look at it next month at February's meeting, ultimately to begin in the fall for next school year. So greatly appreciative of WEEP coming to us, because a major element of our action plan, our equity action plan, is community engagement. And it's just beautiful to see it all come together like that, that the community partner like that is coming to us of how they want to support our efforts. So stay tuned for more on that. Also under the area of equity, I wanted to give Ms. Bailey credit for our monthly highlight that she is doing. Great features each and every month. We have to discuss the topic for next month. That we got to meet and talk about that. But also those are getting not only through our social media, getting out there, but also housed on our website that we put together. So I really think that's making our work public and highlighting the good work that our team is doing and is a part of. That concludes my update on equity. Is there any other questions on that?
I didn't have a question, but just a quick comment. That equity team seems phenomenal, and it's just such a credit to the district that we have that level of participation and just knowledge in that room. And again, to have, we step forward and those folks see that and want to be part of that and partner with us, just really shows what a special place Woodford County is. So thank you so much for that. And really thank you to all the staff and, our students and parents too, for being flexible during this time. I know you covered a whole lot, but the amount of work behind the scenes that you all have to do to pull this together and to just keep pivoting every time there's new guidance and every time there are new mandates is really phenomenal. And honestly, you can see why Woodford is just such a top district. It's really lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It takes everybody. It takes everybody to pivot and put those plans in place and implement those plans. So yes, I agree. Any other questions?
I think so. I would echo Ms. Springgate's. It was a great committee meeting to be in and to hear how excited WEEP was to be able to partner, and then to have the added layer of having Dr. Banks there to be able to help us with some ideas and things that she has worked with successfully in other districts was really a great thing, I think, for the future of our equity team in Woodford County. And I thank you for your hard work on that.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right.
Thank you
very much.
Okay, Mr. Hawkins, if we move into the regular agenda,
Yes.
would you like to take that?
Sure. I can take A and B and then call Garrett up to walk us through item C.
Okay.
Item A, as you know, we created a few new positions back in December to help us as we transition for the second semester. After we went through that process, we did get some new enrollees, and these were just brand new students to the district. In particular, I think it's second grade at Southside, which has put us in a position where we're really at cap in all classes. And in order for us to, I think, do the best job that we can do and give us the best opportunity to stay in school, an additional position is needed to be able to get those numbers down a little bit. So we would ask for you to approve a new elementary teaching position at Southside Elementary. It would be for the remainder of this year.
So moved.
Second. And on discussion on that item, Mr. Hawkins, are you envisioning that cost to come out of the new CARES money, or have you not gotten that far down the road yet?
Well, I think those are conversations that we'll have to have. We haven't gotten final guidance on how those funds can be spent. Just in the initial information that we received, one of the key pieces is that one of the primary focuses for those funds should be on recovery for our students.
Okay.
So learning loss. And so, and given that we have a 2-year window to spend those funds, we have until September of 23. I do think it would be wise to first look to see how those funds need to be allocated in that particular area before allocating them toward maybe staff positions. But again, that's something that can be done.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Ms. Richardson? I'm sorry, you were muted.
No, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Brady?
No.
Mrs. Glass? No. Ms. McHale? No. All right, then we will vote. All those in favor of creating the position requested by Mr. Hawkins, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? I'm sorry.
The second.
I did. Ms. Springate made the motion, I seconded it.
Sorry.
And it passed 5-0.
Item B, the original calendar that was approved in December of 19 had several early release days sprinkled throughout the year. And then when we did the calendar amendment to push our start date back, we also pushed all of our early release days to the second semester. So we have one in February, one in March, one in April. We would like to leave the one for the last day of school, but those 3, February, March, and April, given that we need to be in school as much as possible, we don't see the need to have any early release days. And so that would take a calendar amendment. And so we are asking for your approval on the amendment to the calendar to just change the 3 early release days, one in February, one in March, one in April, to full instructional days.
So moved.
Second. And will that affect any of our PD opportunities for our teachers, or no? Okay. Is there any further discussion on this? Ms. Springate?
No.
Ms. Richardson?
No, thank you.
Ms. Glass? No. Ms. McHale? No. Hearing none, we will vote. All those in favor of amending the calendar for Mr. Hawkins' request, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The motion passes 5-0.
All right, the last item is to authorize the district staff to implement a resolution, and this resolution was developed by Mr. Chenoweth, but call on Mr. Wells because he has been working exclusively, I guess, with Mr. Chenoweth on this.
Good evening. Just kind of give you a little background. When the pandemic hit back in the spring, there was a federal law passed that dealt with some emergency sick leave, and that kind of defined what employees could get as far as being able to take leave. And that expired at the end of the 2020 calendar year. So at the end of December 31st, that expired. So the only option that employees have now to take COVID emergency leave is that leave that is provided by the state. That is, there's really no, it's open-ended. So it's really up to the districts, up to the boards to kind of define what, what are acceptable reasons to be able to take COVID leave, how much you get. And so that's really all completely open-ended. It might look different, it might look the same across the state, but it's really up to each district to kind of decide. And so I've had multiple conversations with Board Attorney Chenoweth, and what we presented with you, I believe, is KSBA put out kind of a draft resolution, and I think he may have, Mr. Chenoweth may have made some tweaks to that. And so what you have before you is what we would recommend. Certainly happy to answer any questions that you have about that.
All right. Is there a motion to approve item C, authorize district staff to implement attorney resolution?
So moved.
And I will second that. In discussion, do any board members have any questions? Ms. Springate?
Yes, I do. Mr. Chenoweth, I know you represent other districts. Is this resolution that we're passing something that other schools are doing? Where does it fall in the scheme of generous, not generous, leave, what we're allowed to do legally, those kinds of things? Can you discuss that a little bit, please?
There are about as many takes on this as there are school districts, it seems like. The way the State Board of Education authorized this, it could be done by AP and implemented just at the administrative level without board action. You all did an amendment to your emergency leave policy in the spring to take advantage of some emergency legislation that was only for last school year. And so my suggestion for you all, at least, was that it be brought to the board again, because that's what was done in the spring. The number of days seems to vary from district to district. The state board's recommendation when they passed this emergency regulation was that it at least provide for 10 days, so that if someone was ordered to quarantine, that at least their first quarantine was on the house, so to speak, that nobody had to dip into their accrued paid leave for a quarantine period ordered by the local health department. And that is the way this has been drafted, to at least allow those employees to go through that first quarantine period. If they are unable to telework, to at least not have to dip into their accrued leave to comply with that quarantine order.
And is there any flexibility in the policy for Mr. Wells and Mr. Hawkins to make a case-by-case determination on extending more days if you have someone who is exposed at work, more than once? Are they offered any grace under this policy?
This one does not have that flexibility. You certainly could give that flexibility. One of the things that I have struggled with, my conversation with Mr. Wells, as well as his counterpart in other districts, is if you make that completely open-ended, how do you discourage employees from risky behavior or careless behavior if you know that every time you have gotten exposed, you get 10 more free paid days? It's all being paid by the district without ever tapping into accrued leave. We don't want to incentivize bad decision making or risk taking behavior by staff. So I don't know if you make it open ended, how you ever address that issue.
I guess I'm not envisioning it so much as a repeated exposure for trips to Panama City as students in their own classroom or co-workers.
I understand that, and I agree that for the most part, those are the situations we would deal with. If it's available for people who become exposed at work, but not for those who become exposed because they had to go to a restaurant or some other event. The problem that I foresee is that at that point we have incentivized lying, because it would be better for them to say, I don't know where I picked it up, I didn't go anywhere but work. And then we have people not cooperating with contact tracing, because if they don't admit that they had to get together for a Super Bowl party, then it's a paid leave period. And if they do admit that they did risk-taking behavior, then it's not a paid leave period. So I agree, most people will comply, most people are honest, most people are honorable. You all have great employees, but it only takes a couple to flout those rules, and it becomes a costly provision in the board policy.
Mr. Wells, what are your thoughts? And I would ask Mr. Hawkins as well.
My preference would be to have a defined number. It's a hard spot to be in my position, to evaluate, where your exposure is valid and your exposure is not valid. So whatever we decide, it would just be helpful to have a defined number to be able to go on. I think that's the fairest thing to do.
And I agree. It's just a difficult spot where I think the more clearly spelled out it is, the less you run into subjectivity in terms of how you implement a particular policy, resolution, whatever the case may be. It's just not an easy spot to be in, and that's where it makes it extremely difficult. And it's kind of like now, if the first exposure is not even at school, that they still get 10 days, paid emergency leave. And so, again, you could probably do it a number of different ways. I think with something like this, it just needs to be clearly defined.
And how many days were permitted in the first?
We were pretty generous. I know there were a couple of times there were some multiple quarantines, so there really wasn't a limit that we held on to it. But for us, where we've gotten so much better, this is the other point I was going to make, we've gotten really good at telecommuting. So many of our quarantines now work with an employee today. They were just notified through an exposure about the quarantine, but because of the nature of their job and because we've gotten better at it, they won't need to take leave. They will continue to work and continue to do what they did before. They'll just do it remotely. So. And
is that opportunity available to all teachers as well?
It's really an expectation of teachers this semester, if they quarantine, that they continue to. Now, if they're quarantined because they're sick, absent any other factors, the expectation would be that they continue to teach remotely. And what we would do is have a sub in the classroom for that quarantine period, for supervision, for facilitation, but that teacher would still be teaching the class just remotely from their home or wherever they are. So yes, that would absolutely be available for our teachers. But again, that's again absent if the teacher's sick. That would not be an expectation. But just a quarantine due to exposure only, that teacher would just continue to work like they always did.
Okay, so then just to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, if one of our teachers had an exposure that was just, and we're quarantining for that exposure, they would not use their 10 emergency leave days. They would just telecommute through that time and not dip into that at all. And then if they became symptomatic and were unable to telecommute, then they use these 10 emergency days and they receive their pay as they normally would.
Correct.
Okay. So hypothetically, the situation that I mentioned earlier, if they were exposed by multiple students within their own classroom, they would still have the opportunity to save their sick time and just telecommute through both of those quarantines.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Ms. Brandy?
I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, Mr. Wells, but have we had situations where folks have been quarantined and or were in need of more than those 10 days, they've exhausted those 10 days, and that's a big issue, or is that really not an issue for the most part? It sounds like what you're describing is it hasn't been, but I just wanted to double check.
So if we think back to the fall, I can think of one case that comes to mind. I can't say it's exactly correct. I can only remember one case that was a multiple quarantine. In that same situation this semester, it would not be any leave at all. It would just be continuing to work, but in a telecommuting fashion.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Richardson?
I'm good, thank you.
Ms. Glass? Ms. McHale? All set, thank you. All right. There's a motion and a second to authorize district staff to implement attorney resolution regarding COVID emergency leave. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The motion passes 5-0. I should have mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, if at any point you guys have a question, please feel free to interject. I remember Mr. Wilson offering that at my first meeting, and I should have remembered to do the same. If there's anything you have a question about, please feel free to say, hey, why are we doing this in this order or anything else? We will now move to our planning agenda, or to our planning session. Mr. Hawkins?
Sure. Martello, you want to present the December financials?
Good evening. I'm presenting the December financials. Same process as every month. It includes the monthly summary report, the balance sheet, and the cash balances by fund report. So if we look specifically at the cash balances by fund, you'll notice there's, just as a side note on the general fund fees, the revenue, there are expenditures for general fund. There were 3 payrolls in the month of December. On the special revenue fees, that included, we received, can I say this? We received in the month of December funds from the state, which came from the feds, that were earmarked basically supplanting seat dollars. And so there was over $500,000 that normally would be coming as an expenditure from Fund 1, which in turn got expended from Fund 2. So you'll know if you look at previous months on this cash by balance fund for a December expenditure report, you'll see the jump in expenditures and revenue in the special revenue fund, because in essence, the state had used federal dollars and had given those funds to, in essence, replace, SEEK as it stands today. That still could be a fluid situation where it's truly supplant, and then we also get the SEEK dollars in addition to that, but more than likely it's probably a supplant issue where they've used federal dollars to, in essence, help with the state budget. So that's quite a jump in terms of the special revenue on both the expenditure and the revenue piece, and I just point that out as just kind of as a note.
And let me just chime in just real quickly on that. We were notified the first week of December that this came from the governor's budget director, that there was $130 million that was going to be issued to school districts. We were also told that it had to be spent by December 31st. So we got, it's about $540,000. And so I met with Mr. Martello, and we both agreed that the vast majority of that should be issued toward payroll, because that was going to be the cleanest way and the fastest way for us to be able to utilize those dollars. Now, what we don't know is, are we going to get the SEEK money back that $540,000 replaced.
And what is the comparison on the total seat that we expected in that amount?
The net of the $540,000.
Difference?
It could be. But what we don't know is, are we just going to stay whole? And part of that whole is $540,000? Or are we going to be whole with seat plus $540,000? Or are they going to reduce seat by $540,000? We don't know. And so we'll find more of that out in the spring. But again, we were notified, it was the first week of December, and basically you have, really you had 2 weeks to spend it because of when the semester ended and people kind of closing down. And when we did payroll for that month, it was a quick turnaround.
For sure. And so what is the typical ending balance on that fund at this time of the year?
It was either in December of 2019, it was either December or January. It was north of 200,000 for the ending balance in that fund too. It's just a spike. And the reason that there's a balance today is and I'd have to go and research it, but it's probably state grants that were paid in advance because your state grants are funneling through there as well. And there's always the potential that those could be federal dollars that are funded on the front end. Normally, you spend your federal and you get reimbursed in arrears after the fact. But there has been times we've had a balance in that fund. Like I say, December of 19 or January of 20, it was north of 200,000. So it's just an unusual spike, and that's why I mentioned it so everybody knows. Okay. Building fund, if I skip down, past school activity and past district school and then capital outlay funds, skipping down to the building fund. So you'll see the negative of the million. Remember, we get our tax revenue in the month of November. We get that big chunk. This year is about 14 million. And then we transfer over, I go ahead and transfer the full part of that 14 million includes the building fund dollars. So I'll transfer, and it's not posted now because this is December, but there's a transfer from Fund 1 to that building fund per the tax rolls that'll go into it to offset that negative to be the north of 2 million that you'll see on the January report. But it's right now, it's basically, in essence, it's sitting in that general fund, in that ending balance for that 17 million. Skipping through, construction fund, you can see the balance there. Debt service, again, your debt service, right now it's in the hole because I need to transfer money from the building fund into that debt service because we've had some bond payments. And then food service, still in the black, which is a positive. And finally, daycare and community ed. For the second component of the report, if you look at the top right-hand side, remember we received north of about $515,000 in CARES. For that first CARES of pot of money that we got in the spring, we're trending well and getting those funds expensed. And remember that $514,000 entitlement included for 2 private schools as well, because we're an agent for that piece. And then finally, the last part is the GEARS money. We got a little bit, about $88,000 in those funds. So we're spending those things, and those are mainly towards technology expenses. So, and then finally, the one-to-one device insurance balance. Remember, this is one that we want to make sure we keep whole. It's not supposed to go in the red, and those are offset by the fees from the students. So we're still doing good, still doing okay in that fund. We're in the black, but not as well as in years past. So, and that's it for this report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins, do you have an anticipated home for that GEARS money, or is there a deadline that we have to spend that?
I think that was part of, I think we had till FY22, September of 22, to be able to spend that initial round of money. So we still have plenty of time to spend that.
And that's something we need to look with Mr. Gibson. I need to get with him and see if there's already things that we've already purchased that perhaps can be recoded to meet some of those timelines as a first opportunity. We did a great job on coding it, but you never know. And so we're gonna revisit that here in the near future.
Perfect. And for our new members, did they get, I know we had a description of what each fund entails that I got when I joined the board. Did they get that?
We did a presentation, and I'm thinking I included it. If not, we'll provide it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I was
Yes.
thinking as we went through that had been helpful when I joined.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move now into the consent agenda. You'll see that we have several donations. Quite a few are for the Simmons DC trip. We also have then donations to the Family Resource Center. So,
Mr. Hawkins, on those, if they are not able to go to Washington DC, are those just carried over for next year?
some of that, I mean, we want to contact those who have donated. Many of the donations come in, they don't necessarily have children who would be going. And I'm sure they would probably be comfortable with it continuing on, but if they had a child who was going to be going, they may want that donation back, and we would certainly work with them on that.
Thank you.
The next item is fundraisers, and we just have a couple, Huntertown and Simmons, and then the high school football team, their annual Mulch Madness. Travel requests, there are none. We do have one non-resident contract this time, and just for our new board members, we enter into non-resident contracts with districts pretty much that are around us, where we may get students. And what that means is, because we have that agreement in place with those other districts, then if a child who lives, let's say in Franklin County, attends here, then we get to see funds. So if we do not have those non-resident contracts in place, then the funds would stay with the district where the child resides. So you will see those generally are done for the following year. So we're actually doing non-resident contracts for 21-22 right now. And there's quite a few districts that we have those with. And a lot of it is because we have employees who live in multiple counties and they can bring their children. And then we also have some tuition students as well. The next item is hardship application, and we do have 2 students that are requesting the hardship graduation exception, and we would ask that you approve those based on the completion of the state minimum graduation requirements. In most cases, these students are already 18, and they would be eligible to not complete if they choose. And so we want to give them the opportunity to be able to finish their diploma meeting the requirements. That's all for the consent agenda. On the regular agenda, first item is the notification of personnel matters. And this is a listing of all the personnel actions that have transpired since our December board meeting. Item D is to accept notification of payment of bills. And you'll be sent information each week about our payments of bills. And we started doing that a few years ago to be able to keep our vendors a little happier, so that they wouldn't have to wait until it was approved at a board meeting before they would be issued payment. Item C is to approve the minutes of the December 7th and December 14th board meetings. And then item D is the draft budget. And Mr. Martello is going to go through that. Before he goes into that, I wanted to kind of give you an update, since I presented the budget for In September, Mr. Martello, I think, had just been on the job about 2 weeks when it was time to do our 2021 budget. Kind of wanted to give you an update on where we stand as it relates to that initial presentation. And so if you'll look at the first page there, you'll see the first column is what we had anticipated in the working budget in September. And we have gone back and we've made some adjustments based on kind of where we think we're going to be at the end of the year. Again, this is still a projection because we receive seed payments throughout the spring semester. We still may get some tax revenue in. We still don't know our final distilled spirits. That usually comes in February. But we're looking at how we are trending in most of these areas. And so you'll see that in the property taxes, we are trending up a little bit over where we anticipated being on the property taxes. Right now, our earnings on investments are trending up. That could change depending on interest rates as we go through the second semester. But right now, we are trending up just a little bit. And we have not received any information yet about a seat cut. So we're going to go ahead and put that amount back in to allow us to maybe have a little different projection on our revenue. The $540,000 you'll see there, that has not been added in because we don't know what's going to happen with that. And that was the amount we got from the governor's budget director in December.
Okay. Just real quickly, does Ms. Richardson have this available?
It was emailed to her, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm looking at it right now.
And so right now, we do anticipate revenue being up a little over $500,000 compared to what we had thought in September. Again, this could change. That's the difficulty with school finance is you're dealing a lot with projections as it relates to revenue and with expenses. So any questions on the revenue piece? And again, that's looking at where we are right now and again, trying to project that out. As far as expenses, you'll see in September what we had thought we would spend in the instructional budget, and we believe we're right on track with that. Student support services, we think we're going to be a little higher, about $40,000 up. The instructional staff support, we think we're going to save a little bit there. District administrative, again, we think we'll probably overspend that or go above what we had projected in September. School admin support, we think we're going to be right on target. Business support, a little over. The next two, you'll see pretty significant difference there in terms of what we had thought. In plant operations and maintenance and student transportation, in both of those budgets, we typically will budget a little higher going into the year because those are the two areas where you could have something happen that you need to be prepared for. You don't know when a maintenance issue may arise that you have to address, or a bus breaks down and it costs significantly more to repair that. The other thing that we have to keep in mind with both of those areas is that we haven't been to school but have the first semester. So we've saved quite a bit in utilities. We've saved quite a bit in fuel costs. We're down about 10 bus drivers. And so we've been able to save some dollars in those two areas in addition to not being in school where we may have fewer repairs than we normally would. So that's a good thing. And I'll give Mr. Martello credit too. is when he's coming in, I mean, he's watching our expenses, and we're certainly trying to do everything we can to keep those in check. So you can see that we anticipate spending a little less than $1 million less than what we had thought, which that's a good thing. So if you flip over to page 3 then, so what we are looking at then is our projected expenses is about a little over 30.9 million, with our projected revenue being about 29.8. So right now we are projecting somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2 million dollar deficit. That is better than our worst case scenario that we had talked about. However, it's still a pretty significant deficit. This still could swing, and it could swing several $100,000 depending on what happens. You know, again, we're very optimistic that we're going to be in school a lot more this semester. And so, again, trying to project as best we can, but we wanted to kind of give you a snapshot of, okay, we gave you a budget in September, and now here we are in January. What's it looking like? And so that I wanted to share that with you, so you have that as a preface before going into the budget presentation for next year. So I'll entertain any questions you may have.
I do have a few questions. I guess if this were a normal year, would you anticipate having a deficit between the revenue and the spending?
Yes.
Okay.
And please keep in mind that we haven't had a normal year now for 2 years, because the end of last year was quite different too, because we had 3 months not being in school, and we had no summer programming. So the end of the year last year was not normal either. And you know, when you think about, we are right at 10 months from when we shut down school in March. We've been in school 8 weeks out of 10 months.
So I guess just to clarify, basically it looks like what we've done is taken the maximum tax increase for the past 3 years, and it looks very likely that we are going to be in deficit spending situation again, where our expenses are going to be outpacing our revenue. This will be 2 years in a row? 3 years in a row. I guess I'm just thinking back to, we've heard the same message, I think, from you and the CFO over the past few years, that we were going to have deficits. When we had these budgets presented, it's been clear in the projected deficits, and then in the reality when the year ends, that we've ended with more expenditures than income, despite having the maximum tax increase that we could have. You know, you provided us that detailed list of expenditures last year, and basically in the fall asked us not to restrict funds again. So I guess my point would be just that we really need to be clear with the public at this point. The financial crisis that we find ourselves in really is the result of the board's action over the past 3 years. And I guess it just really makes me sad to think that this new board coming in is in a position, looking at a budget like this, that really leaves us no other alternative than to start thinking about reductions in spending. So I guess I would just ask maybe that we have a special work session to kind of look over things, to kind of lay out our priorities, to talk about what we can cut so that we can get our expenditures in line with our revenue, and then also just to kind of go, you know, review things and go over things, because we don't want to have a third year where we're ending in deficit spending again. I think that it's incumbent upon us to start doing that right now.
Mr. Hawkins, when you presented, I'm sorry, are you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. When you presented in September, the projected deficit was, what was the total amount?
I said our absolute worst case scenario would be about $2.6
$2.6 million. And Now we're looking at $1.14 million.
Yeah, somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2.
Okay.
And again, that's if it comes out this way.
Okay, so that's a big difference, and obviously we've accounted for some of that with not being in person. In your opinion, if there is not a seat reduction and we are able to keep the money that was the $540,000 that we've talked about, what will the year-end balance look like then?
Well, I mean, we've already been given the 540,000. It's whether that is a gift on top of C.
Yes, that's what I was asking. If it is on top of C, what's the net effect for us?
If our expenditures hold the way that they are, we would still be about $600,000 down.
Okay. And to Ms. Springgate's point, and we've been around this a great deal, the amount restricted is $350,000 in addition to the capital outlay. But the capital outlay is not part of our working budget anyhow.
Right.
So we have an issue beyond the restricted money that is contributing to that deficit.
Well, if you recall, we did ask the board to do a capital funds request last year.
Right.
That would have applied that $545,000 of capital outlay money to general fund expenditures. That would go a long way.
Okay. All right, and I would echo, I think a work session to look over budgeting numbers is a great idea, especially with new members. I think that's a great opportunity for everybody to see a more detailed list and get their hands around what is a totally different accounting system than what most of us are used to, and the guidelines on all of the different types of money. I think that would be very helpful to sit and go over. So I would be in favor of scheduling that as well.
Okay, before we schedule that, I do just want to say, I feel like we need to look at the whole picture. So the restriction, I don't want the public to have the impression that $350,000 restriction is all that has been spent towards the high school project. I think you have to look at it with capital outlay, with how many years, with the 600,000 restriction, with projects that we couldn't do from our traditional ways of doing that. So you have to look at the whole picture, and I think we can talk about that hopefully at the work session. But I think it's very, very, very important to understand that the budgets all work together. That capital outlay dollars that we can't spend on a cooling tower project, that hurts later. That when we don't unrestrict and use capital outlay funds for repairs, that hurts in different ways. So I think we have to look at that in totality. And the other thing I think is important to understand is the projections of $2.6 million and the projection of negative, 1.1 or $1.2 million, that's huge. That's a huge number. And what that represents is programs. What that represents is jobs. What that represents is what we're doing now that we're not going to be able to do. So we have to come up with our list of priorities and figure those things out. And also, that doesn't include raises. I feel like at this point, raises for our staff is something we really need to be discussing. And then the other thing is, this includes, we have $500,000 in CARES Act funding. We have another $2 million coming in pandemic relief. Probably more if you read the news and listen to some of the plans that are out there. And so I think we want to be careful not trying to kind of camouflage some of the issues that we're having budget-wise because we've had these federal dollars kind of coming in. So I definitely think we should probably put our calendars out on the work session day, if that's acceptable to everyone.
I think we're going to have to set multiple work sessions later on when we get to the attorney piece, so we might want to just do it all together.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would also, are you all able to hear me? It says I'm having connection issues on this end, but I can hear you guys.
No, we're good.
Okay, I would also like to say, I do think that work sessions are important. I think that we should do them. But I also want to point out that it doesn't matter how many times we repeat something over and over and over and over again to try to kind of slide it into the public, that ultimately what happens in the work session and the real solid information we come out with from that work session is what we need to be passing belong to the public, not just the back and forth, between us as board members here in this open meeting. We need to get solid information in our work sessions and then at that point pass it along to the public.
Thank you. All right, that concludes the regular agenda.
Now, Mr. Martello.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Martello still has the other.
He still has the 22 budget.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't mean to skip you, Mr. Martello.
You're fine. So tonight, I'll be presenting the 21-22 draft budget for the agenda item. There's going to be a PowerPoint presentation, as you've gotten copies of, and this is a culmination of entering all the data in the Munis software database system. So it's an aggregate and a summary from all the data that's entered. The sister attachment for the actual Munis, the individual line items are as an attachment that stays flat within your KSBA org website. So there's a second component to this with the actual raw data behind it. Okay. It's a process that's mandated, for me presenting tonight, process is mandated by both KDE and state statute. And so with that started, we'll go ahead and go forward. On slide 2, this is 1/3 of the process. For those that have been on the board in years past and for new ones as well. The draft budget is for tonight that we're bringing forward to you, as well as the next third, which is the tentative budget, which is in May. And then finally, September of this year, the final presentation budget will be made. So as we stand, as Mr. Hawkins has mentioned earlier, as we stand here on January 19th, we can only use past projections. We can only use trend data for what is being presented to you tonight. So as best as we know as it stands today. When we get to September, and when we get to May, we'll have more of a finite data. Definitely when we get to September, assessments will be in. We'll have actual assessment numbers. We'll have actual, for the most part, we'll have a majority of our staff hired. We'll know those salary and fringe costs to each specific person. We'll know more of the expected expenditures on supplies and purchase services and those things. So again, this is just 1/3 of the component of a fluid budget process.
Mr. Martello, are
Yes.
we thinking it's going to be on the computer or on the screen or no?
I've got it on the YouTube screen for people at home. Getting it up here is where we're struggling. I'm working on it.
But that's okay.
Yeah, so if they can view it at home, that's fine.
Sure.
Also on our website as an attachment, they can pull it up separately that way also.
Thank you. And Ms. Cooper just noted that this is also listed on the school's website, and anyone is able to download that and take a look at it as well if you're not able to see it on the YouTube channel.
So,
And Madam Chairperson, I'm having some connection issues here. I can hear you guys, but sometimes I can't see you. So I'll try to tune into the YouTube channel to view it.
Okay, just let us know if you're unable to hear something, we can go back over it.
Okay, thank you.
So slide 3 for the status component. These are the things that are some unknowns that we know of as of today. Again, our property assessments, those happen in the spring and late summer for those preliminary numbers from the assessor's office. And then we get final numbers, late summer. But right now we have unknown property assessments. We can look at trend data. We can look at, an estimated 2% in terms of And in the past, you know, in terms of a conservative measure, I'm putting those things in terms of the budget. But right now, we can only use that trend data until we get those finite numbers later on. Unknown legislative mandates, you know, every year there's the potential that we have a mandate that could come from both the state and or the federal level. There could be funding tied to that. There could not be. So we always have to be thinking about those things in terms of our budget. Unknown overall costs associated with COVID environment. You know, as we've been talking for the last, you know, nearly an entire year, there's some unknown or unexpected costs that we've had to educate our kids in a COVID environment, whether it be staff, whether it be cleaning, transportation, you know, layout in terms of counts for the kids in a classroom. So for teacher-student ratios. So again, unknown costs. We don't know what the vaccine is going to look like in terms of once it gets out throughout the community and throughout the community. So again, some unknowns still there. We're going to continue to do conservative budgeting. That's a good practice that we've done in years past here at Woodford, and that's the same mindset that I have. That I want to go about that conservative budgeting model. Federal funds. You know, we've already mentioned Mr. Hawkins had mentioned the $2.1 million that, you know, that's still learning the rules and the regs on those funds. We're going to get some more definite feedback from KDE here in the coming weeks or month. And so, you know, that's out there that we still need to have, you know, some more clarification on. Your annual federal funds, besides CARES, you know, your anomaly here in the last year, your title funds, Title I, Title II, Title III, we won't know those allotments until May or June of this year. So that's a fluid number. And again, with all federal funds, these are we always want to base our knowledge that they're non-reoccurring. So, you know, they could pull Title I next year if they so choose. So we just need to think about those. Federal funds are non-reoccurring. Slide 4. Assumption.
I'm sorry, can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
When you say that things like federal funds are non-reoccurring,
Yes.
does that mean you're not including them in the budget, or what's the assumption that you made?
Sure. For the purposes of tonight, for the draft budget, we're just, Fund 1 is one of the main ones, and we're not talking about Fund 2. But when I bring to you the tentative budget in May, the title funds, we should know that we are going to get those allocations by May. And if they were to pull Title I, the state, and in turn the feds would tell us ASAP, because that, you know, a lot of our staff are funded, or there's a percentage of our staff that are funded by federal funds. And so as a courtesy for that process to happen, they would let us know ASAP. But in terms of tonight, the main meat of what we're talking about is just Fund 1 and not that Fund 2, which is our federal funds.
One other point on that, and as Jeff said, this is simply our general fund budget, so it's our state and local dollars. The federal funds, typically what we have been doing here in the district is when we get our allocation, they give us a percentage that we can utilize at the district. The rest of it is allocated to our schools. And so, so the board has some oversight on the federal dollars, but we have typically done it through allocations out to our schools. So they have been the authority to say, okay, I have this much in Title I. How can we best spend it at this school? So we're not trying to make the decision at the district level for each individual school.
Okay. And I think too, Mr. Hawkins, it's important to make clear that we have not been told that there's going to be a cut of Title I funds.
No.
Right.
And so I think the point being is that federal dollars are always, they have a lot more fluctuation typically than state and local.
Slide 4 on the assumptions piece. So now we're entering the second year where we have a defined AADA, or average daily attendance. That's a metric, you know, that's used for the calculation for the student enrollment count with an attendance mix in there. but this is now the second year in a row that the state has defined our AADA based off our 18-19 enrollment numbers. So that's going back 2 years. They are using our AADA number for funding in 21-22. And for us, that's a good thing, because with the flux of kids coming and going in a fluid environment, we were actually up a little bit in that 18-19 year, which in turn is helping us funding in 21-22. I don't know if we can expect that to, we probably can't, I would say my opinion, we probably can't expect that to happen in 22-23. But that's a constant that we already know as of today. They've already made that determination by KDE. And so,
what's the difference, Mr. Martello, on what it actually is versus the assumption?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head on that number. I don't know that answer, but I will I can try to do a guesstimate from our infinite campus data, the SMS data.
Thank you.
Yes. 2%, the 2% assessment growth. So again, looking at the trend data, trying to be conservative for a conservative budget method, we're going to make an assumption on the 2% assessment growth for local tax revenue. Slide 5. So this one can get a little bit tricky, but I'm gonna talk about the bottom half graph, the last 5 or so rows. But before I do, the top half reflects on behalf, and in essence, on behalf is like a GASB or an accounting entry, and it's not representing true dollars. It's basically an in and out on the books. So we don't get on behalf money from KDE and then in revenue and then spend that money. So it's basically an accounting entry. That's why when you look at the expenses, or I'm sorry, when you look at the revenue piece, where it says FY20, that 39 million total revenue, including on behalf, notice that number is a lot higher than the bottom number where it says total revenue excluding on behalf of the 29 million. So in essence of tonight, and to not confuse everybody, just know that the main differences between the layers of that report is the element of on behalf. And again, that's just an accounting entry, but we have to be cognizant of that piece whenever we look at other reports. Okay, so you'll notice that in essence, I did this graph so you can see, as Mr. Hawkins has mentioned in previous presentations or board meetings, and then the trend of the district as a whole, we have more of our budget, the percentage is coming out of a local source versus a state year after year. So if you see the percentage of local revenue in FY20, that's 65.69. That's saying that in that fiscal year, of our revenue piece, 65.69% was from local sources or local tax dollars. Then when you jump to FY21, it goes up more, 68.2. And then on the projection, it goes up to 68.44. So you can see it's going up on that local obligation or the local piece versus the state. And then the sister to it, the state piece of what the state component is, it's going down to 2.6. The difference between across 2 years, if you go over to the far right and that orange number, that 2.63, that's saying over the course of 2 years, it's a swing of 2.63 that has gone in essence to that 2.75 for the local obligation. Everybody follow me there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's important to note, especially for our new members, that this is not how it was intended to be. It was not intended that the onus for paying for school system expenses was found at the local community level. It was meant to be funded by the state. And as they have consistently underfunded education at the state level, those dollars have come more and more from the local level. But you'll read about those different things, and then there's a lot of information about trying to get that back to a better balance and advocating for education at the state level budget.
let me clarify one piece on that, is that, let me first say that we are underfunded at the state level. However, the seat is actually operating the way it was designed. It was designed as an equalizer. Because more property-rich districts, if we were to get the same level of state funding that a much poorer district would get, you could see how the inequity would grow. And so the idea that we're going to get less state money because our assessments continue to go up and we're generating more locally, that's by design with the formula itself. And so it is meant to equalize. However, we do believe that the state has not funded us appropriately. And we do deserve more dollars. But because we are a little more property rich than other districts, there will be an inequity and in terms of those percentages. So I don't know that it would ever be 50-50 here. Ideally, it would be. You're generating 50% locally and you're getting 50% from the state. But that's very few situations where it would work out exactly like that.
Thank you.
So if you turn the slide, or turn the presentation to slide 6, it's just an informational that, kind of like I alluded to earlier, we're not going to discuss the special revenue piece or the district activity fund or the school activity fund tonight, but that will definitely be in presentation form in the May tentative budget. Just as a side note, you've got roughly 3.4 on special revenue, roughly 850 on the district activity, and about 1.6 on the school activity. So there's a big chunk there on the special revenue piece. Okay. Slide 7, capital outlay. This is a pretty simple statistic in terms of how you drive or how you get to the capital outlay fund. So since we already know that constant of AADA on the previous slide, based on 18-19 enrollment data of that 3590 or 3,500 and some change on the AADA, all you do is multiply that number by $100 per AADA. And so that's how much will be awarded in 21-22 for capital outlay funds. We already know that constant value. Building fund, a little bit shy of the 3.3 million that we received from building fund based on our tax rolls. And then finally the 2.6 million for the debt service. Basically a little bit that shy of 2.6 is what we have in debt obligation for bond payments for the fiscal year of 22. It's very similar to fiscal year 21, but that's how much we owe throughout the year on those bank notes for principal and interest on the outstanding bonds. So slide 8, child nutrition, something that we have to be cognizant of. This year in fiscal year 21, that may not be the case in fiscal year 22 is, as we all know, or the majority of us know, as we started the year, the feds through the state declared that students that did, whether they were whether they qualified for a free or reduced lunch count or lunch qualification metric based on their household income, whether or not they qualified or not for that household income, they had the option to get a meal for this school year. And so that's an impact to revenue, and so to the good of the district. But we don't know. That's an unknown that could be in fiscal year 22 that will impact that food service fund. So just as a caution that's an item out there. Slide 9, the enterprise daycare fund. This is one that we need to be cautious about and be cognizant that as we have a virtual school environment in terms of the kids coming in and paying that tuition for that proprietary fund for the enterprise piece, that impacts revenue. It also impacts revenue, since we've had smaller class sizes for good reason with the COVID environment. You know, that reduced the opportunity for enrollment dollars or tuition for that setting or for that program. So just as a caution that, you know, we need to track that when we finish out fiscal year 21. You know, is there potential that it could run into the deficit for this program? And then the sister part to it, what does fiscal year 22 look like? You know, are we going to have some of those same constraints there for that enterprise fund? So just as a caution. Slide 10. So our staffing, just like, you know, every school district in Kentucky or across the nation has a staffing matrix or a staffing rubric, and you know, that's adopted by policy and administrative guidelines and policy. And so you know, that has a sister piece to it in terms of impacting the budget, you know, for teacher to student ratios. But we follow a formula and a guideline. Okay. The budget that's being presented to you tonight for the draft component does include step increases for those individuals that have not stepped out on a salary schedule. It does include a step increase if they haven't stepped out. It does not include a pay raise. It does not include a pay raise. I'm sorry, it does not include a raise to the salary schedule. That's a better description. So if that's something that the board would like to entertain in the future, just note in terms of the purpose for the draft budget, an increase to the salary schedule is not reflected in these numbers.
And just to clarify what the step increase, if you look at our salary schedule, there is a slight increase as you progress through each year that you work. You will earn a little more. And so you progress up the salary schedule, it stops at year 30. So if we have people beyond year 30, they would not get a step increase, but anybody under that does. And so if you look at our salary schedules, you'll see it's year 0, it's your first year, it's this, year 1, it's a little more. So this includes that step increase. It's how we refer to it.
I understand that we're not including the increase to salary schedule, you know, or raises in this budget. But in our work session, I really hope that's something that we can talk about and discuss and have some numbers on. I definitely think it should be a priority. You know, our staff have been phenomenal over the end of last year, the beginning of this year. And I really think that's something we need to make a priority. When was the last time, do you know, that we had an across the board raise?
It's been 4 or 5 years. I'd have to go back and look and see. We did make an adjustment, I believe, in 2017 to different portions of the salary schedule. It was either 2017 or 2018. We made some adjustments, but it was only to a portion of it. And then we obviously did some things with bus drivers this year. I think we did some things with individual groups or small groups, custodians, and things like that at different times. But across the board, it's been several years.
Yeah, we did I'm sorry.
I was just saying, is that something we can discuss in the work session and have some kind of numbers on and costs? Because again, I just think that should be our priority.
What I was going to say is we did do the small groups, like you said, last year. I think it was cafeteria and custodians.
I think we bumped up our bus monitors. So,
yeah.
But you know, I think one of the things, and this is part of a future consideration, I don't want to, you know, but I think one of the things we've really got to begin thinking about, if you've read recently, part of President-elect Biden's next stimulus package is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And if that does happen, that will have a significant impact on us.
How many, I know you probably don't know exact numbers, but do you have a rough percentage of our employees that are making under $15 an hour?
Well, here's the thing that you have to consider. It's not just that number, because we have we call them different classifications of classified employees. Okay, so you would have to look at the lowest group, and they're at about $12.17 an hour.
Okay.
So if they get raised to $15 an hour, the group that is right above them would have to be raised that same amount, because you would have to keep that difference between them, because they're in different groups. And then the group that's above them, you would have to raise them. So it would impact nearly every classified employee that we have that's hourly. And it would be significant. When you start looking at close to a $3 an hour raise for our classified employees, because to get from 12.17 to 15 as a starting point. So the next group is at like 13 something. I'm not going to just move them to 15 and keep those groups, because there was already a difference between those two groups. So if that's a $1 difference, then they go to 16. And the group that above them was at 14 something, they're going to go to over 17. So you can't just look to say it's only this group of employees that we have to get to 15. Almost every hourly employee would have to have that same or similar adjustment.
Okay. Is that something that you can bring to us, that you're able to get an approximate cost on for the
We
work
can
session?
certainly, and let me say, I don't mean to sound negative when I say that, because I think our folks are deserving.
Oh, yeah, I don't think anyone.
But I don't think we can underestimate what that cost would be. And we'll certainly start looking at some figures, but you would be looking at close to a $3 an hour raise almost across the board for every classified employee. If we want to keep the same delineation that we have now. And a lot of that is based on education or skill level or things that are needed for a particular position. But that would be quite significant. And again, I saw that over the weekend, that was part of his stimulus. And again, even if we get some federal money to offset that now, it's coming sometime. And you've got to be prepared for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you looking forward like that and mentioning it now.
On slide 11, like I was mentioning earlier, we won't know those entitlement amounts for the federal dollars until May or June. So that's something that we have to think about there. Long-term maintenance needs. We've got issues every year regarding maintenance. Whether it's a roof repair or a roof replacement, HVAC replacement, plumbing, and those types of things. So we just have to be cognizant of that. Just the normal expectation on past trends, but there's also the anomaly. We didn't expect for a flood to occur or for the pipe to break here at the high school in the bathroom in the last couple of weeks, which wasn't cheap. So in that, granted, it's an insurance claim, but there's still the cost and in turn the insurance piece. So there's always those maintenance piece, and that's one thing. Also, we in addition to that line item, we're going to get with the principals and the department heads for that. For that feedback, what they would like to see or what they think needs to be replaced in terms of their building. So we're going to try to do that this spring to get that list of maintenance concerns or items that they bring forth.
And hopefully a lot of that information will be captured on our district facility plan as well.
Yes.
It can be the typically, and I think Jeff was referring to how we would go about the capital outlay process. Is what we've typically done is ask our principals what are some things, and most of those items, such as when we put the canopy at Southside, okay, that's a discretionary piece, which means you can't bond it.
Sure.
So those are general fund then expenditures or capital outlay expenditures that would have to be considered. And typically, you don't want to bond a $100,000 project. That doesn't make sense. So again, just trying to look at those. Now, if you've got to have a roof replacement, yeah, that's probably gonna end up on your facilities plan. But some of the smaller projects wouldn't necessarily end up there.
Just mentioned the use of capital outlay, we've already discussed about those specific there are specific items that have to be approved, by KDE that you can use specifically capital outlay dollars that normally would have been a general operating expense, but part of future consideration. Again, is there going to be an increase to the salary table? Future consideration, unknown overall costs associated with the COVID environment. And I'm going to let.
I think one of the things on that one, and this is, as I've talked with some of my colleagues, I don't know that we know what to expect when we start school next year. Because I still have not heard any mention of when kids are going to be able to get a vaccine. And so if we start the year next year with 90% of the people occupying a building not vaccinated, are we still going to be looking at trying to have smaller class sizes so we can have greater distance in the classroom? I don't know that. I think that is one that is still to be determined. We'll know a lot more as we go through, I think, spring and summer. But I mean, I just haven't heard anything about kids' vaccines. And so, again, that may be still something that we are facing and trying to plan for and deal with as we start school next year.
Utility rate cost increase. So that's a number that we know fairly, we know that constant number. We've already been notified by KU Utilities, and it's going to be a little bit shy of an 11% increase that has actually already occurred on January 1 of this year. So a little bit south of an 11% increase for electricity. So have to adjust for that.
What's the total effect on that for a year?
Electricity, object 0622, it's off the top of my head, I think it's about $500,000 or 600. Don't quote me, I think it's in the $500,000 range, so whatever that is, 11%, 55 and some change. Maybe.
Because most of, and the bad part is, most of our utilities are electric.
Right.
So we don't have gas either. So, which may not be a bad thing, I guess.
And again, just for clarification, future considerations, are these included in the overall budget right now, or some level of them?
A little bit of a level on the utility rate increase, probably not the full 11%. Mm-hmm. The COVID, not the full on what we've done in fiscal year 21. So the answer is no.
Not the full thing. And again, I think what we're trying to anticipate is, may we have to hire a few extra teachers? Yes, that may be a possibility. And so we've tried to budget for, we hired 19 this year. I don't see us having, I hope we don't have to hire 19 more next year. But we are planning that we may need some.
No on the salary table piece, possible use of capital outlay. No, those are remaining there in capital outlay fund. Long-term maintenance, there are some dollars that are budgeted for normal wear and tear, but if a significant item happens, there is not a significant dollar amount budgeted in that component. Just trend data, what we've seen in maintenance costs. And there will be the grant revenue piece. There will be that tentative piece on the grant revenue in May. Summer school, I'll let Mr. Hawkins touch on that.
And I think Mr. Asher alluded to that in his instructional update. I think, in the past, our summer programming has been pretty much directed at early primary, And it's been targeted very much so at students that were below the 25th percentile. And to really address the learning loss, I think we're going to have to look at something that's more expanded than that. And you're probably looking at a K-8 type of summer program as opposed to elementary only. And I think high school may need to be expanded a little bit too from a credit recovery standpoint. So again, I just think it's going to be something it's going to be much more than what we've done in the past. And we're just now getting into the stages of what that may need to look like. And some of that's going to be based on assessment data as we really look at our kids and how they're doing.
The SEERS or SERS rate rise. So that's the classified classified retirement system for them to be solvent with the actuaries. You know, they're going to have to raise it from 24% to 26.95. So that's something that we're going to have to account for in our budgeting. The virtual,
we were fortunate this year that they left it. That increase was supposed to occur this year, and they deferred it by a year. So we will see that increase next year.
The virtual academy piece for 22.
Yeah, and this is one, we just had some initial discussions on this, and again, I've talked with several of my colleagues. We've had a large number of students who have been very successful in the virtual setting. What are we going to need to offer for them going forward? What type of virtual academy needs to be in place for them, if that's what they would choose? And I think the reason that we have to look at that, number one, it's twofold. Number one, as Mr. Martello said, our AADA right now we're still using 1819 numbers. So our enrollment and attendance next year is going to drive our funding going forward. So if we don't offer an opportunity for kids where they say, this is how I've been successful, and we lose those students, that impacts us tremendously going forward. And so I think we're going to have to offer some type of virtual academy. And then the second piece to that is that there is legislation that's been introduced that would allow tax credits for contributions to scholarships for private schools, or potentially even public schools. And so if we don't offer those kinds of opportunities, do we risk losing students who may take advantage of those scholarship opportunities to go someplace else? I think what we have to recognize from this pandemic is school's going to look different, not only next year, but every year after that. And we have to be ready to make adjustments and to not just say, okay, kids, we're okay, so you all come back to the building. They may say, that's not what I want. That's not what's best for me. And I think we have to be ready to say, okay, here's what we're going to offer. So that is a piece that could impact staffing in some way. We don't know. Again, we're still in the early stages of those discussions, but again, I think we would be naive to think that we don't have to offer something like that moving forward for our students.
Property assessments and tax rate, again, that's a future consideration. We'll pretty much know that number on the assessment piece when we get to the September budget approval, and then preliminary and the preliminary piece in the spring. But again, use an approximate 2% increase based on past trends. And then again, end of year balance decline for fiscal year 21. That's what we're making the assumption to build fiscal year 22, and then a decline in contingency or a budget deficit in FY22. So if we turn the page to the revenue piece, a majority of our revenue at the local level is the general, the delinquent, and the franchise tax for that 15 million on the first line item. And, that's a majority that where we get those local dollars from. And then in conjunction with distilled spirits, the motor vehicle utility tax. So, those are the big pockets on that local piece. And I forgot to mention, the left side of the budget reflects keeping a flat tax rate at the 69.8 rate. On the right-hand side, that reflects taking a 4% revenue tax increase. You'll notice as you look down the lines on each row that the only difference is that first row, or that taking that 4% impacts the general property delinquent tax and the franchise fee. It's an increase, of 300,000 as an approximation, or approximate amount. So the swing would be 300,000. If you go down, notice that again, everything is constant. You see the seat piece is at 9.2 million. In terms of that, the state has a big chunk of the state revenue piece. Going all the way down, you get to the second to last item. Again, that 39 million reflects us with the on behalf lumped in, just an accounting entry. So the bottom line for the 69.8 millage rate or tax rate, you're looking at roughly 29.9 of expenditures. Of revenue for the FY22 budget for the draft version. And then the sister part to it, the 4%, is a $300,000 increase to over the 30.2 million. Again, left side based on flat seat, right side taking 4%. If you turn to PowerPoint to page 14 or slide 14, there's the other sister to the expense. On every budget, you've got expense, and then the sister to it is the revenue. So on the expense piece, these are the different what we call function areas of a budget, with the majority of it being tied to instruction. That's the direct impact to kids in a classroom setting, your teachers, your paras, or your instructional assistants. And you can just go through the different areas and see there on the different components. Again, when you get to the second to the last line item, that 41, or we'll just talk about the last item, not to confuse things. That last line item is the 31.92 compared to the revenue. So on the expense, 31.92 for that piece. So if we turn to slide 15, that culminates, or that brings both pieces together. When you do that, you've got if you don't take the 4%, you've got the expense of 31.9, net against the 29.9 revenue equals a $2 million deficit. And then if we were to take the 4%, that's a 31.9 expense, that doesn't change. And then the revenue is north of 30 million, or 30.2. So it reduces a little bit by 300,000, so a deficit of 1.7. Again, this is as of January 19th, 2021. We've got a period of time, but that's the trend data as it stands today. That's a fluid number. Okay. Beginning balance, and in the fluid part affects it even more on the bottom half of this. This reflects our beginning balances through the years, and you can see fiscal year 19 or the 18-19. It's been exactly where those are the true dollars, 7.8 and then 6.8, and then it went down again to 6.6, projected to be 5.4 at the end of this fiscal year. And then it gets down, reflecting that $2 million deficit to 3.4 at the end, or I'm sorry, at the start of 2022-23. And then if we take the 4%, you can see it brings it up a little bit to 3.7. So that's that trend analysis.
Well, This is a scary slide. And again, I think it just really reflects what we were talking about earlier, the need for a work session. So taking the maximum rate that we can take to increase 4% increase in revenue is negative 1.7. So our expenditures outpace our revenue 1.7 million. If we leave the rate flat, then the negative number is around 2 million. And I understand these are just projections and things can change. But again, 2 years ago, we had a budget with negative projections. We ended the year in reality in a deficit situation of around $1 million or so dollars. Last year, we had these sessions, these budget sessions where we had projections. And again, ended the year negative. And so I guess what's even more frightening is the slide underneath, the columns underneath, where it clearly shows that, you know, the beginning balance is around 7.8 in 18-19, and then down to 6.8 in 19-20, down to 6.6 in 2021, projected to be down to 5.4 for 21-22, and then for 22-23 projected to be down to 3.4 if it's flat. And with the 4%, which is the maximum we can generate, that's the maximum amount we can ask folks for. We went in 18-19 from 7.8 to 19-20 down to 6.8 to 20-21 down to 6.5. Projected for 21-22 down to be at 5.4, and then projected for 22-23 to be around down to 3.7. So that's just not the way you want to be trending. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Marcello, for the work session, could you bring the guidance from KDE on contingency funds, the requirements on those, and then the percentage of hours, and if we could please do comparable, or actually Mr. Hawkins and I had to talk about comparable districts is hard to determine.
Yeah, and because you don't know each district situation,
sure.
the minimum requirement is 2%.
Okay.
And what we have strived to be at is somewhere between 8 and 10.
Sure.
And 8% is about 4 to 5 weeks of operating costs.
Right. And 8% is how much money?
Well, it would be dependent on the full budget with the, including the on behalf payments plus food service. So that's in the neighborhood, and we'll have to get the exact numbers, but you're probably going to be in the $50 million range when you look at the general fund plus the, so 8% of 5 million or 50 million would
right.
be about $4 million for a contingency.
I'm sorry.
And it's not just the 2% that we have to realize, and we've talked about this in the work session in further detail, it's a cash flow too.
Sure.
You know, if our tax revenue doesn't come into November, and we've got those payrolls, you know, it's not just meeting a 2%. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, Mr. Martello, just to clarify for our new members, basically we have to kind of live on the contingency and we use that for payroll until the taxes come in. And so it has to be at a level where we can pay those bills. Otherwise, we have to go to get a short-term loan, or I don't know what even happens. We've never been in that position before. But we have to have that contingency money to pay the bills before it gets replenished with the taxes. If you don't have it, then I don't know, do we not pay bills? Do people not get paid? Do we go to short-term lenders? What do we do is the question. And that's something we can kind of talk about in work sessions too.
Any other questions for Mr. Marcello?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that leaves us with proposal to the board for tonight, for intern next week. Leads us to the two options. Option one, draft the budget based on maintaining our current tax rate of 69.8 in August and September, once our assessments have been certified, and that drops the contingency to about 3.41 million. It's option one. And then option two, approve the draft budget based on taking the 4% tax rate in August and September, once our assessments have been certified, and that drops the contingency to a little bit over 3.7 million. So with that, I am done with the PowerPoint presentation, unless there's any questions.
I did have just a few things. Mr. Hawkins, first of all, thank you for gathering that information from the other districts with the tax rates. I found that very helpful. I looked through that over the weekend, and it's just clear to me that Woodford County is kind of outside the norm at this point. So only 40 districts took the 4% last year. And of those 40 districts, Woodford was one. 15 of those were independent districts, which, are a little bit different. So if you just look at the 25 county districts that took the 4%, all but 2 have a lower tax rate than Woodford. The exceptions are Oldham and Nelson. Boyle County's tax rate is almost identical to Woodford. Last year, they took the compensating rate, yet the district was able to provide a retroactive 2% raise to all its employees in the fall. I think that we just really need to consider what's going on in the world with the pandemic, what's going on in the state with funding, and how this is all kind of coming together. But if you look, 61 districts took the compensating rate, which means they received no new revenue. It really illustrates the fact that most districts are not living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that at this point, we really need to have this work session to kind of look at some foundational information and priorities and numbers. And our plan cannot be just to tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend, because it's clear that that is not working for us at this point. So I really do appreciate having this information. I think it's valuable and insightful. So thank you.
On that, I went through, and I agree it was helpful information, and pulled out the same districts that we used when we were trying to discuss the nickel initiative with the community, and the counties that we use as a comparison in saying, here's how Woodford County's tax rate compares. And you can see, and this is the same data, just pulling out the Central Kentucky counties. And if you look on the back, the graph shows Woodford County at 69.8 is right in the middle. Fayette County is taxing at the highest rate, and then Franklin, Mercer, Boyle, and Woodford County in that order, followed by Jessamine, Garrett, Anderson, Madison, and Scott. But as Mr. Hawkins has told us in the past, Scott County is not an apt comparison county for us, just one that we border, so I included it as a point of reference. So that, we'll go around again. Ms. Richardson, do you have any comment?
No, ma'am, thank you.
Ms. Glass?
No.
Ms. McHale? No. All right, then we will be ready to vote next week on that, and later in the meeting, we'll set the work session to address those budget issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martello. All right, Mr. Hawkins, do you have anything on the COVID update that you would like to go over?
I don't know if there's anything additional. What I think Mr. Asher covered quite a bit in terms of our return back to in-person. We continue to work closely with the health department. We are very excited. We're going to get quite a few of our employees vaccinated the first dose tomorrow. So we've got that scheduled. Certainly cannot thank the health department enough. for how they have worked with us through this. And then the remaining employees will be vaccinated on Wednesday the 27th. So that is good news to at least get that rolling. And I can just tell you that as I visited the schools today, it was a joy to see students back in the building. So.
And could you share, I think that you told me on the phone the rates of the employees that opted to get those. Do you remember what that was?
Well, not every employee responded to the survey, but over 80% of our employees responded to the survey. And of that response, nearly 88% wanted to get the vaccine.
I think that is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Seeing data from other schools, that is really wonderful news for the students and teachers at Woodford County. That made me really happy to hear that.
Danny, I did have a quick thing. We skipped discussion item. I just wanted to ask, in preparation for our upcoming work session, Mr. Hawkins, if you would mind to get some of the ethics codes and how they do things from Fayette County. I know they do it there.
Sure.
Thank you.
Still on I went back to the next agenda. It's fine, either way.
Thank you.
Item B on the discussion, we had sent you, all board members, the information from the attorney firms that had expressed interest. And I think now it would just be the point of the board setting up times if they want to review those, how they want to move forward in that process.
Do you have a suggestion on how these types of things have been handled in the past?
I haven't been here when we've done that. So,
Chidwick has been our attorney since the board I came on board in this
so
this year.
it's been
Since the 90s.
So
Yeah, I think it would be helpful just to go ahead when we're scheduling the work session for the budget, just to schedule some sessions so that we can have the folks in and interview them basically. So if we just set those dates, then it's something we could take care of. I do think it's important though with the attorney that the attorney does work closely with Mr. Hawkins and district staff, so it would be important to have you involved in that, Mr. Hawkins. And then I also think that we want to be, very fair and very transparent in how we do these interviews. And so I think it would be really good for us to make sure that we have some criteria that we want to discuss with the folks when they come in for the interviews. So, once we get those dates, I think that's something we can move forward with.
And are you anticipating interviewing everyone that applied or narrowing it down? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's something that, the board would have to kind of decide time-wise what makes sense. There weren't that many applications, so.
9? Okay. Do you want to, if we look at doing 9 and allowing 30 minutes each, that's pretty extensive. Do you want to look at having the board review the applications and maybe seeing if we can select 5 at next week's meeting to move forward and schedule a work session to do interviews?
Whatever your preference is, that's fine with me. I just think it's really important that we have criteria for doing the selection and that we're open and transparent with the community what that criteria is. For instance, one thing I'm really concerned about is I would like to have an attorney who communicates with all members of the board so that everyone is included in communication. I think billing is important. How are they doing the billing? What's the total cost? With our budget, clearly that's something we need to be cognizant of. I also think, we need to know, do we as a board expect the attorney to appear in the meetings, to be present, and if so, how does that work? So we just really kind of need to come up with some criteria and then decide, who is going to be interviewed. I think this is something with 9 different applicants that the board could have a final decision on. And so, maybe that's one way moving forward to say, are there any that, you would not want to interview for whatever reason? and remove them and then leave the, 5 or 6, whatever the number you think is appropriate, and then move forward with the interviews that way, something like that.
Mr. Hawkins, do you have any thoughts or input on streamlining that?
I really don't. I mean, obviously, we would like to have some input because my staff works directly with the attorney.
Of course.
And, but in terms of process, I don't know that I can say do this or do that. I think you've got to determine if you want to, number one, interview them all. If you want to try to meet to try to narrow that down, and then go through that process.
Okay. Ms. Richardson?
I think that over the next week, the board members can look at the attorneys that have applied and maybe do some research on their own and then narrow it down to 5 next week that we could then interview individually.
Okay. Ms. Glass?
I agree. I think we can either in a work session or through the next week, like Ms. Richardson said, that we should be able to look at what we've gotten already and narrow down the firms that we feel like we should reach out to interview.
Okay. Ms. McHale?
I agree. I think 9 is too many to interview all at once. It would be impossible to make a determination after interviewing 9 people. So I agree.
Okay. And Mr. Hawkins, is that something that we can send to you if we have 5 and you can put that data together and bring that back to the next meeting if each board member sent to you the 5 that they would want to interview, or do we need to do it in an open meeting as a discussion item?
Should we ask Mr. Chenoweth?
Well, I'm not sure how you end up, you're going to end up with ties if you do that, and you're probably going to end up with more than 5.
Okay.
If you send me 5, and Ms. Richardson sends me 5, and Ms. McHale, if everybody sends me 5, I doubt it's going to be the same 5 on everybody's list. And so consequently, then you're going to end up expanding beyond 5.
Okay.
So I don't know that would get us to where you want to be.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I just say that, we're all adults here and we have to work together and we have to decide on a number of attorneys that we're going to interview. Every time we meet for a work session, every time we meet for a planning meeting, an open meeting, everything, it costs our taxpayers money. So let's do our due diligence. Let's research the attorneys that have applied for the job. We all need to be adults, come up with 5 people and move forward.
Okay. Then I think the best way to do that is for everyone to review the information we've been sent, and we will have an action item for next week's agenda, and we will vote on 5 attorneys to interview. And Mr. Hawkins, if you and Mr. Wells and anyone else in the district would like to weigh in on that, I certainly agree that your input is invaluable on that, as you guys do work with them a lot more than we do. Is that agreeable to everyone?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, it's fine with me.
Okay. Ms. Glass? Yeah, it's fine. Ms. McHale? Okay, sounds good.
The next item is I just wanted to get the board's thoughts. We have not, of course, over the last several months, we have not had any overnight or out-of-state travel, and just wanted to make sure that you guys were good with us continuing with not allowing that, at least for the foreseeable future. I think there still is a concern, particularly with the fact that students haven't been vaccinated yet, although adults might have been at that point. I still have a little concern with any out-of-state travel at this point, so I just want to make sure you all were agreeable with us kind of sticking with that at this point in time.
And yes, I agree. And do we need to move that to a vote, or is that just a discussion for tonight to agree on?
I think if there is consensus, then that gives me direction on how we can handle that, at least through February and March.
I think that my perspective is that that's completely appropriate. Ms. Springate?
Yeah.
Ms. Richardson?
Yes, I agree.
Ms. Glass?
Yes.
Ms. McHale? Agreed. There you go. All right, we'll move on to the next item is item D, and Ms. Springate asked for this item, so I will let you present.
Okay. Well,
Or do you want to just do an intro, or I can do an introduction?
that's fine. I just want to welcome Ms. Lemire as our new architect. Hello. Nice to see you.
Hello.
I look forward to working with you on the new project as we move forward. I do have a few questions. Are you still based out of Arizona?
I am currently in Arizona, but I will be back in Kentucky very shortly. I was supposed to actually be back there by Monday, but my house sale fell through, and so I'm still looking for a house. But I will absolutely be in Arizona very soon. I mean, back in Kentucky very soon.
Well, good luck with that house sale, and hopefully that'll all work out quickly. I wanted to know if you've received any guidance regarding protocols for communicating with the board on the high school project yet?
Just from Kevin, who said that to make sure that I always copy Scott on any correspondence that I send to anybody. Other than that, I'm open to whatever kind of correspondence we want to have between folks. And I want to make sure that I'm communicating with you the way you feel is proper.
Thank you. In your past experience when working on school projects, typically who is the point person that you communicate with?
Oh, that always varies by project, but typically the superintendent is prime correspondent with usually whoever. There's always a design committee, and usually whoever's chair of that would be the person, and that can vary greatly within different districts.
And I guess you could just send this later, but if you don't mind, if you have any examples of when you're not communicating directly, like with the superintendent or the finance officer, when you're not communicating with district staff, if you could just send examples of names of districts where that might have happened. From this point forward, I am requesting that all communication regarding the high school project run through the superintendent or district staff. Mr. Hawkins is the board's chief advisor, and he serves as our business manager for the day-to-day operations. If there's any need for the architect to correspond directly with the board, I would ask that all board members be included in this conversation or communication.
I think we may.
I will do however you all want me to communicate.
Thank you.
I think we may need to clarify with Mr. Chenoweth. I know that the reason that it wasn't sent to all board members previously was for fear of an open meetings violation. So Grant, could you weigh in on that as an ongoing process to notify or to include all 5 board members on emails regarding the high school project?
Yeah, it's always my concern that just an accidental reply all or anybody who goes beyond a just acknowledgement of receipt and starts discussing something substantively with a reply, that can turn into essentially it's a meeting of a quorum of the board accidentally because somebody replied all to a email that was originally sent to all the board members. So the cautious advice that I've always tried to apply is just usually there's correspondence with chair and the superintendent, so that from my office at least that has been my practice. Many times that is just advice to the chair as to open meetings, presiding officer type of duties, and the rest of the board gets the benefit of that by seeing it implemented as opposed to being part of a discussion as to what the advice is. I don't have any problem with all of the board being copied on communications. I just always like to make sure that everybody understands, all board members, including the new ones, of just the danger of accidentally drawing everybody into an open meetings violation by turning an informational email into a discussion email just by any comment of beyond thank you or receive. If you turn it into I agree or I don't like this, can we talk about this at our next meeting? You've immediately turned it into a discussion about how you feel about the topic as opposed to just having received the information about the topic.
Well, and I do appreciate that, but I think as Ms. Richardson stated, we're all adults here, and as long as we're not replying all to emails with information, we should be fine. I think it's a danger anytime you get reply all, but I think that the need for the board members to all receive the same information at approximately the same time really is something that has been an issue in Woodford County. And I think that there is no open meetings violation for board members to receive information, especially if that information is flowing through the superintendent. We just have to all be careful not to hit reply all on any emails, and be careful not to discuss board business outside of board meetings. But I think that's something that we can kind of handle.
And I understand this to be a request. Are you asking that we make this a formal policy? And who does it apply to? Does it apply to all vendors? Does it apply to?
Well, right now, I think just in speaking with Ms. Lemiere, I just am requesting that from the architect because they have been given different guidance that really wasn't approved by the board. It wasn't a protocol or a policy. So basically, all I'm saying is, can we please all have information at the same time? I think that's very important. And I also think that if the communication runs through the superintendent or district staff, we don't have the concerns about open meeting violations because, again, that's coming from the superintendent. It's information only.
Okay, so just as a point of clarity, then you're asking that Ms. Lemiere send all correspondence to Mr. Hawkins and then he shares that with the board.
Correct, and I believe she said that at times she would also send correspondence to the chair, and so that would be shared with everyone, or the vice chair. I'm not sure if you mentioned anyone else, Ms. Lemiere.
So to clarify, when I said chair, usually there's a design committee of some sort that is responsible for relaying decisions to the board. Sometimes that's a board member, sometimes it's a principal, sometimes it's somebody else involved in the school. So I'm happy to send it however you all want to reply. And I didn't mean to imply that when I said chair, that it was always the chair of the board of education.
Yeah, and again, there's no problem as long as the information is shared with everyone. So I think the cleanest way would be to send it through the superintendent or district staff, and then, everyone would receive that information at the same time. And we would all receive the same information, which is something that's very important.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to say that I appreciate that we hire professionals who operate in a professional manner, and I trust that they've sent the information to the appropriate person, and then that information is relayed to us in a timely manner, whether it be before a board meeting or presented to us during the board meeting. So, I'm okay with the architects and the other people that we hire. I think that they will make the decision of where that information needs to go and that we get it when we need to get it. I do think that we tread lightly when we send it to everyone and expect everyone to just automatically, with the emails we get numerous emails a day, and expecting us not to hit reply all every single time and accidentally making an open meetings violation is kind of a far reach. So whatever protocol we come up with, I'm fine with, but I think that we just really look into that. We can always do an open record request if we feel like that we're not getting the information that we deserve.
And again, I just think it's more transparent and cleaner if all board members receive communication and information at the same time. And so that's what I'm asking.
Okay. Moving on, I'm sorry, Ms. Glass, do you have any input? I don't. Ms. McCann? No. Mr. Hawkins? Do you have any input on that? Okay. All right, then, moving on to item E, and I'm sorry, I should have said, welcome to Ms. Lemire. We look forward to working with you and to being able to meet you in person in better post-COVID circumstances and when you have been able to locate in Kentucky. Welcome.
I cannot wait to be there and meet you all in person when it is safe to do so as well. I very much look forward to working on the high school project. I think it will be a great project, and it'll be great to meet all of you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
We'll have you hang on for just one more second here until we get through the next item, unless Ms. Spring, you feel like we've covered item E, communication and process associated with new high school project.
No, I did want to discuss that and just kind of go through and clarify a few things. So over the past 2 years, our board has not functioned in an efficient and effective manner. This is no secret. The dysfunction has been widely discussed within the community. During my campaign for re-election, many people voiced their frustration regarding the board's inability to work as a team with the superintendent. My goal as a returning member of this board is to regain the support and trust that was once placed in this important institution. To get a clearer picture of all that has transpired over the past 2 years between the leadership of the board and Superintendent Hawkins, I submitted an extensive open records request for former Chair Edelin's communication with our board's architect, attorneys, and construction manager. Additionally, I asked for all correspondence between the chair and other board members in which I was not included. This stack of papers here is the result of my request. I would like to thank all of those who helped with the search. I believe the insight gained through this process will be pivotal in moving our board forward to a healthier place. 2 overarching themes emerged as I reviewed these records. 1, significant board member overreach into the day-to-day operations of the school district, and 2, a failure to follow a clearly defined process for planning, designing, and constructing a new high school. The Kentucky School Board Association provides thorough training to board members regarding the delineation of roles and responsibilities between board members and the superintendent. In addition, the board received a summary document from our attorney clearly outlining the root cause of the strained relationship between the board and Superintendent Hawkins. I would encourage each of our new board members to request and review this communication. Despite KSDA training and communication from our attorney, board leadership has continually overstepped its boundaries into the day-to-day operations, creating division, confusion, and a great deal of behind-the-scenes maneuvering. This pile of emails represents Ms. Edelin's involvement in matters related to the high school project. I am confident you would not find this level of communication or involvement on a construction project in any other district in Kentucky. I was extremely shocked when I learned Mr. Locke had been given a directive as to how he should communicate with the board. On April 27th, Mr. Locke wrote the following in an email to Mrs. Edelin with the subject WCPS communication guidance. Just checking to see if all the previous guidance I received concerning correspondence with the board has been changed. I was under the impression from the past meetings / guidance given that I was to communicate with the board chair and vice chair, as well as Scott and Amy on matters related to the high school. If this has changed, please let me know as soon as possible and what the new guidance is. This email begs the question, who gave the initial communication directive to Mr. Locke? I do not recall the board discussing or taking actions on specific communication protocols with the architect as referenced in this email. Furthermore, a response to Mr. Locke's email was not included in the records I received, so I assume Ms. Edelin responded to Mr. Locke's inquiry by phone. According to the records, there was no change in the communication pattern after Mr. Locke's email. It appears Mr. Hawkins was completely excluded from communication for 3 months during the early design phase of the new high school. Little to no communication was provided to the board during this period of time. As time went on, the records show Mr. Hawkins was included, but in many instances, the emails were addressed to Mrs. Edelin and Mrs. Bradley and only copied to him. According to KSDA and our attorney, the superintendent is the manager of business affairs for the district. It is his responsibility to keep the board updated, which allows for open and transparent communication with all members. Failure to follow this process can lead to exclusion and violations of the Open Meeting Act. This is the reason the superintendent is tasked with handling business affairs as it affords all members to be active participants with equal information. A second theme that became clear through my review of the documents was the failure to follow the planning structure outlined by Ross Torrance in April of 2019. This document includes the superintendent on the steering committee and a mechanism to involve the Woodford County community. By illegally removing the superintendent from the process, the board lost its chief advisor and communicator on this project. This void allowed two members to overstep their role into the day-to-day operations related to the new high school. How could Mr. Hawkins carry out his duty as chief advisor if he was intentionally excluded from participating in the committee? Ironically, Mr. Hawkins was excluded by the same two board members that have driven the high school project up to this point. This graphic outlines important stakeholders, including our community, that were to be involved throughout the process. To my knowledge, no formal input opportunities have been provided since the steering committee was disbanded in November of 2019. Additionally, a clear communication plan for the new high school was never established or followed. Although a website was created, it was never linked to the district website, nor has it been updated in over a year. Why was there an effort to keep the website separate from our district site, and how is this conducted to effective communication? My concerns regarding the overall process lead me to the newly formed advisory committee that will begin meeting in the near future. I did not understand the need for the board to pass a resolution naming Mrs. Bradley as chair of this committee. That had never happened in the 10 years that I've been on the board. But after reading an August 13th email from Kevin Locke to Debbie Evelyn and Danley Bradley, the motive becomes clear. Mr. Locke states, the steering committee would need to be caught up on decisions made during the design development phase of the project. These decisions would need to be confirmed by that group. It is hoped that the directions taken previously are not rehashed or revised during this process. Mrs. Bradley needed to be the chair to maintain control of the project, the goal being no changes to previous work. I think it's also important to note that Mr. Hawkins was not even included on this email. Additionally, until just a few hours before the meeting, I had no idea that Attorney Chenoweth had been asked to draft this resolution. In the same email, Mr. Locke writes, ideally the committee would contain two board members. Why did Mrs. Evelyn only appoint Mrs. Bradley to the committee? Why didn't she ask if another board member was interested in serving? At this point, I think the answer is obvious. But this behavior must stop if we are to regain credibility and operate as a cohesive board. I could provide many, many more examples of the gross overreach, micromanagement, and maneuvering behind the scenes, and could do so in the future if necessary. But that is not the purpose this evening. As our new board begins, I'm calling for change, which I believe will ultimately unite this board. I'm calling for board members to immediately cease interference in the day-to-day operations, including business matters related to the new high school. If any of our agents needs to converse directly with the board, the communication should be addressed or at least copied to all members. Also, the previous communication guidance issued to Mr. Locke and Ross Torrance should immediately be discontinued since it was not approved by the board. Secondly, I'm calling for this new board to examine the process used by other boards in planning, designing, and constructing schools. I'm hopeful Mr. Hawkins can gather this information for next week's meeting. Thirdly, I'm calling on the advisory committee to review all aspects of the high school project and determine if any revisions, adjustments, or improvements are needed, given that the board has not followed the outlined process and very few stakeholders have been involved since November of 2019. Additionally, school may look different after the pandemic. And wouldn't it be prudent to examine the plans and determine if the pre-pandemic design fully meets the needs of our students now? Building a new high school is a once-in-a-generation project. We will not get a do-over. It has to be done right this first time. Finally, I'm calling on all exclusionary conduct of the previous board to end. If we want to unify, it is imperative that we see ourselves as a collective board comprised of 5 equal members. No board member, regardless of title, holds any more authority than another. We should all receive the same information at approximately the same time. For this reason, I'm asking that board member communication be added as a standing agenda item to allow all members to be informed of communications. In summary, I want to say publicly that I'm committing myself to work toward a more cohesive and effective governing approach, while at the same time pledging to do whatever it takes to ensure that the previous board behavior is corrected. Our students, staff, and community deserve our best efforts. I welcome any comments or thoughts by other board members on this subject.
Ms. Richardson?
Yes, I would just like to, first of all, I'd like to point out that with the previous board, Ms. Evelyn, Mr. Wilson, Ms. Bradley, myself, and Ms. Springate, as a collective board, we did work together. The only person who stood out in most instances was Ms. Springate. We would vote, and if she didn't get her vote, then she never did agree with the board. She consistently said that she wants us to work together as a cohesive board, but in fact, she's the only person who doesn't work together with the rest of the board. I don't disagree with her that we do need to work together. I think that is important for our community, but every single meeting, Ms. Springate is one individual who stands out and complains that she isn't being included, that she, that we're not working as a cohesive board. And in fact, I think that we are. I think that each individual board member plays a very important role in each situation that we find ourselves in. If you look back at the record and you look back at our meeting, every single meeting, the only person who stands out and thinks that we're not working as a cohesive board is in fact Ms. Springate. With the committee and her saying that, that none of us were asked if we wanted to be a part of it, I disagree with that. I did have communication with other board members about it, and I was asked and I declined. So I think that this is just another attempt from Ms. Springate to call out board members. It's disruptive. It's not productive. We can't move forward in this manner. And, I do agree with her that I hope that we can from this point, but if she continues to do this at every meeting, I don't see where we're going to move forward with anything.
I would just like to respond to say, this is an open meetings request that I got that clearly shows all board members were not being included in the same information, number one. Number two, I would like to know if other board members were asked, because I wasn't, and if two or more board members discuss that outside of an open meeting, that's clearly an open records violation.
Well, Ms. Springate, I wasn't
asked. I would just say that I do think that we all worked together, the previous board worked together well, probably 90 or 95% of our decisions
this is exactly
were
what
5-0 votes.
This is what you do every meeting. Madam Chair, can you please let me speak?
I was speaking when you interrupted me, but I would be happy to let you speak.
You should get used to that because that's typically what you do to everyone else.
Go ahead, Ms. Richardson.
I think that this is an unfair attack. It is Ms. Springate's opinion on what happened, and she can continually say these things in open meetings and make it look like that the board is working against her and that we're not working together, when in fact the board has worked together. And Ms. Springate is the one who has continually said that we haven't. When the board votes on an item and we move forward, the board should move forward as a whole, as she has said. And that doesn't happen. So I do hope that we can do that from here on out. But I also think that it's ridiculous to think that every single board member needs to be involved in every single communication when Ms. Springate communicates with attorneys and doesn't include all of us in it.
Again, I would just like to say that my pointing out bad behavior by the board, unethical behavior by the board, or illegal behavior by the board is not the issue. The issue to me is that the behavior occurred in the first place. And this stack of documents clearly shows there's been some dysfunction. I would say that I believe the board does work together and did work together. And I think the point is that the future board needs to avoid the pitfalls and the mistakes of the previous board, that the information should be shared. And I think we all agree, every board member should have equal access to the information. We are all members of the board. We are all elected. We can't do our jobs if we don't have the information. And for me to only receive this information basically this month is not acceptable. So again, if you, go back and review the meetings, they're all recorded. Clearly there's been some dysfunction. Clearly there have been issues with communication. And what I'm doing is simply trying to move us forward. They're with concrete suggestions, helpful suggestions. And I will say that I do believe that 95% of the time the board, previous board, got along just fine. Our decisions were 5-0 numerous times. However, I think when there are issues, we have to address the issues. We have to face the reality that it's not acceptable. This is not acceptable.
Okay.
And so,
Ms. Bridget, did you share that stack of papers with the other board members?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Have you shared your stack of evidence there with the other board members?
I did an open records request to get these records, and so my comments just kind of summarize what I found. And again, the point is that board members should not have to do an open records request to find out we have a new attorney, or we have a new architect, or we have
Ladies, I think we need
information.
to move forward now.
Thank you.
Okay, I just have one more question, Madam Chair. I just want Ms. Springate to answer if she shared her evidence, that stack of papers with the other board members so that we could take a look at it.
I'm going to actually answer that. I did get a copy of that stack, and I will tell you that a great deal of it is multiple copies of the same email, which is, it's going to happen in an open records request. It's unavoidable. But I did review all of that, and I will say in conclusion on this item, I do think that it's been made clear from KSBA training, from advice from the attorney, that it is not at all uncommon for the board chair to serve as a officer of the board. In fact, I think that's what they are elected to do. I do agree that information has to be shared, but I also agree that it's not, I want to make very clear that we are not casting aspersions on former board chairs or on Mr. Locke. And I do wholeheartedly embrace the idea of going forward in a more positive tone. My hope is that we can move forward tonight in an intentionally positive way. I think we need to take this opportunity of a new board to change what has sometimes been a contentious tone at our meetings and make it more a model for what we want our students and our community to see. At a time when our country is experiencing derision and divisiveness, we do not have to have that at the local level. We can find a way to model civility, to model disagreeing and still being able to move forward. I think that we need to be able to look at our fellow board members, and even if we disagree with them, see that they have merit and that they are here with service in mind. I think if we do that, moving forward with clear expectations for everything, that we will all be much better served. So we will move on now to item F. In light of Mr. Hawkins' announcement tonight, Mr. Chenoweth, could you help? I know that we can amend the agenda with a vote of 3 board members, and it seems like that would be the appropriate step to take. Would you agree?
I do agree that is, the fact that the superintendent's contract is expiring and that he has announced that he's retiring, I think already fits within the scope of the agenda item. But if you, the board can essentially vote to accept his announcement, and that's what creates the determination that a vacancy will exist effective July 1. That doesn't really require an amendment to the agenda because that's already a topic on the agenda, even though it's for discussion item. The board, you all do that as an organizing principle as to which things are for action and which are for discussion. The Open Meetings Act doesn't require that distinction. The Open Meetings Act just requires you to have a topical list of items that might be discussed or acted on. So essentially my advice is you're current agenda item allows you to discuss all things related to the superintendent's contract, including the fact that it's coming to a conclusion and that a vacancy is going to exist.
Okay, so the motion language would be, I move that we accept Mr. Hawkins.
Accept the superintendent's announcement of his retirement and declare that a vacancy will exist July 1.
Okay. Angel, did you get that?
So moved.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gibson.
So moved.
Oh, I made the motion. Do you want to second the motion?
Yes, second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I did not ask for discussion. And I'm sure that's
I
something.
I don't know that there's any discussion that we can have. You know, it's unfortunate to have, you know, a retiring superintendent in the middle of a pandemic. You know, I do think maybe, you know, we need to be open and flexible and just kind of look at things. You know, I'm not sure with the pandemic how things will go as far as the search, but I do believe that we need to do some things after this. So maybe discuss about that after the motion.
Okay. Do you have any comment, Ms. Richardson?
No, thank you.
Ms. Glass? No. Ms. McHale? No. All right, then now we will vote. All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. All right, the motion carries 5-0. Mr. Chenoweth, are you able to advise on the next step?
I actually had an idea. I feel like how we have done all of our hiring of agents has been through a request for proposal. So I would make a motion that we do a request for proposal to see which groups would be interested in helping us with the superintendent search. And that will allow us to get that information in and then be able to make some decisions.
Go ahead, Mr. Chenoweth.
Only thing I need to add to that, that's not an incorrect idea. The decision to seek out a search firm or a KSBA offers those services, other entities do as well. The only statutory deadline that you have is to establish the superintendent screening committee within 30 days of your determination tonight that a vacancy will come into existence. So the statute lays out the membership of this committee. It's 2 teachers elected by the rest of the teachers, 1 board member appointed by the board chair, 1 principal elected by the principals in the district, 1 parent elected by the parent-teacher organization presidents in the district, 1 classified employee elected by all the classified employees in the district, and if none of those members is a minority member, and the district has a minority population of at least 8%, then there's another election to include a minority parent. But it's at least the 2 teachers, 1 board member, 1 principal, 1 parent, 1 classified employee, and then again, you add 1 more parent, a minority parent, if none of the existing members are a minority. That you have 30 days from tonight to get that screening committee established. That takes very slight priority over getting a search firm or a headhunting firm or whatever those entities go by. That doesn't have a deadline other than just the pressure of a July 1 vacancy date, but the screening committee has a firm deadline 30 days from tonight.
I think with that in mind, and I think this will still fall under the superintendent contract item, I would make a motion that because we are a school board, that we receive our training from the Kentucky School Board Association, and we know that this is a service that they provide, rather. I would move that we use KSBA as our screening or steering committee facilitator so that we can move forward on that 30-day statutory deadline.
Well, I just have a procedural issue. I've made a motion that we do a request for proposal so we can see what
I'm
firms.
sorry, I didn't catch that you were.
What the availability is and what things would cost. I think especially with our budget right now, we really need to have people, send us in and say, yes, we can do the search, it will cost this much, it will take this long. Just get that information in so that we can make a good decision. And it sounds like what Mr. Chenoweth is saying is that the committee really is the thing with the deadline and date line. And so that would be something that would need to be started immediately. But the actual choosing of the organization or firm that would help us with the search isn't something that's super urgent. And again, I would say that because we don't know what's out there, we don't know what services are offered, we don't know how much things cost, it makes sense to do a request for proposal, just like we did when we hired the bonding agent, just like we did when we hired the architect, just like we did when we're looking at the new attorneys. So that's just something that gives us information about what the different agencies and firms do, and also information about the cost. And so I stand by that motion.
Is there a second?
I have one other question. It's for Grant. So once we select our community/staff committee for this process, do you have to hire an outside firm? Is that also a part of it? Or so this is a two-step process, or can it be one or the other, or just one? What is that?
The screening committee is mandatory. I will say from our experience, most boards do enter into a contract with, I can't think of who else offers that service off the top of my head because we're usually not involved in the superintendent selection process. We help with the contract once you've made a decision, and that's where we come in. So I don't remember who else offers that service besides KSBA. Most boards do retain somebody to assist with that because they help with the advertising and they help with coordinating interviews and gathering materials. They help the screening committee screen the applicants. And so it just, I don't know what it looks like for a board to go through that process without the assistance of somebody like KSBA who has been through it countless times. I don't know how fast the turnaround process would be if you all voted to put out that RFP, whether you would be able to have responses as quickly as next week's meeting, where you already have a meeting scheduled, a regular meeting. I don't know what the turnaround would normally be for something like that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there a second? The motion dies for
I'll
less than a second. I'm sorry.
What? Can you repeat the motion, please?
Ms. Springate has made a motion to do an RFP for groups that provide superintendent selection training, or facilitating rather.
Okay.
Are you withdrawing your second?
Yes, ma'am.
Hearing none, I move that we move forward with the Kentucky School Board Association as the facilitator for the superintendent selection committee. We've all have experience with them in board training, and this is a service that they specifically provide to school boards. So I would make the motion that we move forward with them. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in.
I did have some discussion about that. Do you know what the cost would be on that game?
I actually have the cost on training items that they had, and I know that the other group that they said provides the service, and Mr. Hawkins could maybe weigh in on this as well, was the Kentucky Superintendents Association, or
Kentucky Association of School Administrators.
Thank you. And at the training that I went to at our last conference, I think they said that the difference in cost was $100. between the two of them.
Do you know what the cost would be for the service though?
I will have to look back on my notes to find out.
And do you know exactly what the service includes?
Again, it was a presentation. I'm sure that you've been to that same training, and they go through, this is very much a statutory requirement on this committee, and they make sure that everything is being adhered to, that no violations of privacy are occurring. And after the concerns that you have voiced tonight, I think that having someone in place sooner rather than later is a good move forward for the board.
I understand that. I just think it's prudent before we vote on something that we know the cost and we know exactly what the services are, which is why I thought we should get a request for proposal. Really, I think probably what would make more sense is to know what it's going to cost before we say we're going to do it, and also to know what they're going to provide before we say we want it. And if there are other groups that do this sort of facilitation, I'm not saying we shouldn't get one. I'm simply saying before we vote on it, we should know what they're doing and how much it costs.
Okay, thank you. So there is a motion and a second to select KSBA to facilitate the superintendent selection search. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
No.
No. The motion carries 3-2. Mr. Hawkins, is there a need for executive session? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor? Aye. And if everybody will stay put, we have another meeting to call to order right away. And
I need to do that.
Mr. Hawkins will be doing it.
I'll call to order the meeting of the Woodford County Finance Corp. First item on the agenda is to elect a president of the Finance Corp. And I'll open it up to nominations.
Who typically serves in this role, Mr. Hawkins?
It typically has been the chair, but it could be anyone.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to nominate the chair, Ms. Bradley.
Second.
Okay, so we have are there any other motions? All right, so we have a motion for Ms. Bradley to serve as the president of Finance Corp. And second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Okay, now you have to get the other officers.
Okay.
Vice President, Secretary, and Treasurer.
All right. I would nominate Ms. Springate to serve as Vice President of the Finance Corporation.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Richardson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. I would move that we designate Mr. Hawkins the Finance Corporation Secretary.
Second.
Motion and a second by Mrs. Richardson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. I would move that we designate Mr. Martello as the Finance Corporation Treasurer. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second by Mrs. Richardson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting of the Finance Corporation?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Springate, second by Ms. Richardson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. And that wraps up the meeting for tonight.